evening, all. Prannoy said he can't market his own book. I don't know who else will, but, but he's marketing Literature Live, which is nice. I think most of you who are here know about Literature Live. We do these evenings once a fortnight, sometimes more often. And of course, we do the annual literary festival in November. This year, the dates are November 14 to 17, so block your diaries. I hope to have Prannoy and Dorab there again. I've been trying to get Prannoy to our festival for the last few years, and he pretends not to know my number or my email. But anyway,
I'm too scared of you not to. Always answer.
When I ring him now, he's taken to saying, before I can say anything, he says, "Hello, young man." And so I think he's made a mistake. So this is Anil Dharker. And he says, "I know," so which is good. So.
Wait till you get to my age, then you'll know.
Well, we are here to talk about something which is all around us, engulfs us every day. And this book, which all of you must buy and get both of them to sign, tries to decode India's elections. I don't know if it's possible to decode India's elections, but I think you've given it a good try, and we will talk about it in the next few minutes or so. But before I proceed, I must thank Crossword for changing the whole layout of this place today. Normally, these events are held. Normally, these events are held there. It's a narrow corridor. There are not too many people can sit. But with the sex appeal with these gentlemen, I thought we needed more space. And there are people sitting up there too. So there we are. I believe Prannoy Roy has something to do with NDTV, but we are here today to meet Prannoy Roy, the psephologists, which I can never pronounce, and Dorab, of course, the two pioneers of this science in India. Now, just a few statistics which I gleaned from the book of the elections this year. There are 895 million voters, 1 million polling booths, and 130 million first-time voters. And I think that's very significant. To quote the book, "Democracy is in the DNA of voters." That's one of the sentences there. Elections are a triumph of freedom. And the other point you make, I think, is that the poorer the people, the more involved they are in the elections. And we have seen that in the turnouts, particularly in Bombay, which have been really poor. And so let me start by asking you, why is that so? Why are the poor more bothered about the elections than the well-off? And both of you can answer.
Yeah. Well, we do write in the book that we've created a fantastic society in India. One country, two systems. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. So they've got to fight to survive. While us, we've got a welfare state looking after us. Enough subsidies. So they're much more involved in making sure that their politician comes to their village and does something for them. They went in the first 25 years, the first elections were in 1952. In the first 25 years, there was a kind of euphoria and a belief in politicians, and governments kept coming back. 80% of governments were voted back. It was a period of pro-incumbency and a very naive, believing, hopeful voter. Then by 1977, after they'd been completely
Naive or
let down,
Optimistic.
Optimistic, yes. Then by 77, when they'd been completely let down, they got really angry. They said, these guys have let us down. We're going to throw each one of them out in every election. And more than 70% of governments were thrown out. So from 80 being brought back in, 70% thrown out. Now it's, since about 2002, it's 50-50. If you perform, you're voted back. If you don't perform, you're thrown out. So you've got a much more discerning, wise voter that's fighting for the rights and fighting for development in their locality, in their village. So they go out and teach MPs and governments that don't perform a lesson, and they reward governments that do. But they are much more involved. For us, it doesn't really matter. We have a social welfare state anyway. Socialism for us.
It is that actually, when you think about it, a person who works in corporate life, he has PF, he has LTA, he has bonus, he has retirement benefits. What does your driver have? None of those. So social capitalism for him, out when I don't want you. To sack somebody in a corporate life, you need a charge sheet, then before whatever, give compensation, give gratuity. That's socialism, everything protected. For the poor, it's always been capitalism. So they're saying if we are capitalists, we might well exercise our capitalist clout once in a while and beat up a few people, including politicians.
This actually is a new formulation because usually it's supposed to be the other way. So,
Right, exactly.
what I find interesting is that you've divided our polls since 1951, which was the first, to now, into three phases, as you were just saying. The 1952 to 1977,
25 years.
25 years. And then
Another 25 years.
then another 25 years. And now we are in the 17th year. Right.
Yes.
Do you see a 25-year cycle or has it just happened?
I wouldn't say that it's a absolutely precise 25 years because, say, 1977 turnaround started happening in 1967. The disillusionment began as a very significant year, 1967, where the Congress party started having internal bickering and the voters looked at these guys and said, is this what we wanted? You're fighting for your own seat, your own power. The corruption started coming in and eventually got totally disillusioned. And I mean, if you ask me, the finest election I have ever covered, and I've been covering elections in India and abroad since I was about 12 years old. Don't ask me why. And the finest election ever was the 1977 election, where the people of India threw out autocracy and dictatorship. The vote of the people was just fantastic that year. And on that year, a lot of us were sitting in a Barsati following the elections as the results came in. And I tell you, when the results came in, a lot of apple juice was had and nimbu pani, Scottish nimbu pani. It's the best. That was a great night for India.
But suppose, this is of course in the area of speculation, because 77 is a landmark. That's because of the emergency in 1975. Suppose there had been no emergency. Would things have been different? Did the mood change because of the emergency?
I don't know. Actually, not really, because the emergency was because the mood had changed. It was Indira Gandhi trying to stay in power that she imposed the emergency. Self-preservation. I don't know.
Post 2002, one thing that's changed the most is the availability of media, television. People are getting better educated, their expectations are higher. They see things on television, wonder, how come I haven't got them? How come I'm living so badly when other people seem to be doing rather well? How come this kind of development hasn't come to my village? How come that bridge hasn't been repaired for 2 decades? So I think they are also the better educated. They're more literate. You know, in every way, it's a more developed society, though we're not a very developed society yet. It's much more developed with the onset of more media.
There's a somewhat contentious argument to say that towards the mid 70s or thereabouts, corruption really came in a big way, and you call it state capture.
Right.
Now, are you also saying that there was no or very little corruption before that in the electoral process?
You know, I think, forget the electoral process, which is corrupt, even, very corrupt even today.
No, it's very corrupt today, but let's go back.
No,
And
I think the
are you
corruption
saying
is-
that from the first election, to the mid 70s, there was hardly any corruption?
No, I'm not saying that, because if you recall, Mr. Nehru apocryphally said, we enter parliament with a lie on our lips. When we make those statements about our election expenses, Mr. Nehru said, we enter parliament with a lie on our lips. So there was some corruption even then. But the question is, as this continuous rule of one party, you feel that you can do whatever you like, because you're infallible. I mean, you can never be kicked out. So that sort of added to the brazenness with which state capture and things like that began. Who's going to kick me out? I can do what I like. I'm almost a dictator, because I can get elected again and again and again.
Just to clarify, by state capture, we meant from 1972 onwards, the government started taking over, or politicians actually started taking over banks, airlines, industries, one after the other. And it was all in the name of doing it for the poor. Which is a total misnomer. There's so much being done for the poor in this country, and they haven't seen any fruits of it. It was pure self-interest by politicians from 72 onwards. And, okay, there was a thing we wrote, which is not in the book, but we've said the three big changes in Indian society. 72, and the state capture, it'll take us, Indira Gandhi was the main person who did it, and it'll take us 75 years to undo all that. All the banks are still nationalized. It's very difficult to undo these kind of things. Then came VP Singh, who, okay, we did need affirmative action for the poor and for the lower caste, but not with political motivations. We needed genuine affirmative action. But casteism was created for political ends. And caste is now, that set us back another 75 years. And the worry is, the social divisions now, the third big divide, will take us another 75 years to bring back harmony in our society, which is the tolerance of India. So these three great moments have set us back 75 years each, only 225 years, that's it.
Well, some of us might be around then. But what you're talking, what you describe as state capture was actually socialism, right? And it was, no, but the motives were
In the
good.
name of socialism, they did it for themselves.
No, the motives were good. You are saying that this was deliberate capture with the view of creating corruption. And this is in hindsight. I think the motive then was
to get money. I mean, state capture meant you made money out of it. You put your cronies there. They give you commissions of all kinds. I mean, what amount of money black money after demonetization, some does exist, I'm informed. What amount of black money do you think is being spent in this election? I'd be very surprised, less than 30,000-40,000 crore. Now, that's small amount by his standard, but a lot of money for me.
That's the percentage I get on all his deals. 10%, 30,000 crores. Can you imagine how much he makes? All Parsis, Parsis, but they give you a commission.
That's right.
I must thank you for that. Trustworthy.
You think we should go to the audience? For
Yeah,
questions?
whenever.
Well, what Prannoy has suggested is that we try something different, which is that instead of keeping the questions from the audience right to the end, we break the conversation into phases and ask people questions on what we've just discussed. This is, according to Prannoy, to ensure that the audience stays awake.
That won't happen anyway, I think. I can already see a sleepy.
Okay, so are there any
Kamini
questions
is
on
always
what we have
sleepy.
discussed so far? Only on what we have discussed so far. But already. behind.
Just shout.
Hi. You spoke about the role of a technology which is, helping. You
sorry?
spoke role of a technology and the media which is helping everybody in terms of better informed. Now, I think electronic voting machine is a child of a technology.
We haven't come to that yet.
No, I know, but I'm talking about if the technology is impacting well, then why some part of our politicians are so against about use of this technology?
Can we come back to that later? Because that's a
Up to you,
very,
but that's the
very
question.
important question.
Up to you.
Try and stick to what we discussed. Otherwise, we'll move on. Yes, Nadir.
Thank you. I'm a visitor, so the question I ask is born out of ignorance. Why is it, if you're talking about corruption, and I'm not suggesting Indian politics is corrupt in any way, but why do so many politicians get rich from one Lok Sabha election to the next and get re-voted back in? If the electorate is more discerning and more educated, why we've got a plutocracy rather than, I'm not saying it's a kleptocracy, but a plutocracy. How does that happen?
Good question, and I'll tell you the reason. In elections, for an issue to become an electoral issue, it has to fulfill two conditions. One, it has to be important for you, the voter. And yes, corruption is very important for every person in this country, right down to an old lady in a village, and we've traveled around India so much recently. For example, they get widows get 1,000 rupees a month. When they go to the bank, it's all in the bank, go straight to the bank. When they go to the bank to collect that 1,000, the bank manager and the tellers say, oh, it's a big problem giving you 1,000. Yes, you deserve it, but a lot of hassle. If you give us 500, it'll go. Every month she pays 500 out of 1,000. And so you got a bank manager looking at a poor lady getting 1,000 rupees and taking 500. What kind of people are that? But the issue is, one, it's important to them. So corruption is important. But it has to fulfill a second condition. And that is, one side has to be better than the other side at solving that problem. And they're all corrupt. I think somebody's trying to cut me off, I think.
The beep.
That's a beep.
The beep.
So it has to be one
big
side.
beep for corruption.
Right. So one side has to be better than the other. But as Cho Ramaswamy, if any of you remember him, the great Cho Ramaswamy, said to me once on a panel, actually for BBC India Questions, he said, corruption, it's like voting between a pickpocket and a thief. So corruption is not a voting issue, it's a daily issue until you're clear that one side is less corrupt and will change corruption than the other. It doesn't affect your vote.
Kumar. No, there's a mic floating around. Okay, give that here.
No, the simple point is in 1977, when you had that Scottish Limupani on a Barsati, actually entire South, minus 6 seats,
Right.
had voted for Indira Gandhi and Congress.
Yes.
Entire.
Yes.
Entire. Only
Yes.
6 seats were lost in 1977.
Right.
So does it mean that South is less concerned with freedom and democracy and only North is more concerned? Because the defeat of Indira Gandhi's Congress in 1971 was primarily because of the voting in North.
All tough questions he'll answer.
No, it's where was the Nasbandi? Where was the Nasbandi? Not in the south. I think yes, but the question is, during the emergence, the real, what we call, yes, but the atrocities of the emergency were visited more
No, not there.
on people in the north than in the south. I can't imagine anything happen in Tamil Nadu. Nobody was bothered by the emergency in Tamil Nadu. But in UP, in Bihar, you
This
heard
one
these
here.
grisly stories of the things that were happening under the emergency, thanks to Mr. Sanjay Gandhi and his friends. And I think that's the price she paid.
And I think the press also fought more in the south. The Hindu, many of the southern papers fought, and in the Delhi-centric view of India, they were not punished the way no papers in Delhi and the north were. So they didn't really feel the lack of freedom as much as in the north, plus Nasbandi and all that.
Okay, I'll just take one more question. The young man in the cap.
Good evening, sir. Sir, you have, my name is Parijat and I work as a scientist. Sir, you spoke about socialism and taking over of the state resources by the government. Air India, it is surviving despite whatever is happening there. And on the other hand, airlines who was giving a very efficient services has just closed down and 16,000 people are just on the road, just don't know what to do. So won't the Air India employees be thinking that it was good that we came under the umbrella of the government?
Well, Air India has a 50,000 crore debt, by the way. It's not surviving, it's surviving on taxpayers' money. And it's meant to be a symbol of India's entrepreneurship and service. It's frankly a disgrace to India. It's sad, but anybody you ask around the world, what do you think of Air India? It's considered one of the worst. As far as jet is concerned, going down, it was a great airline, and one has to look as the Japanese do. When an entire industry is doing badly, which are domestic airline industry, everybody is suffering, then it's a policy problem of the government. So you don't step in to save one company if the others are doing well, but if the entire industry is in trouble, you're doing something wrong. Your taxes on your fuel is too high or whatever. I'm not an expert in what they're doing wrong. But when an entire industry is suffering, the government needs to step in and not favor any one person. So you don't favor when an industry is doing well, but one guy is doing badly. But you step in when the entire industry is in trouble.
I think today one of the papers reports that Air India is giving up X number of its airline because they can't pay for the lease and asking to buy or lease 6 of Jet's aircrafts. I mean, what sense does it make? You're using the taxpayers' money. You know, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, you know, somebody said to me many years ago that capitalism is like, in a way, you know, Hinduism. Companies are born, they die, they are reborn, they die. You must allow a company to die. Because when a company is not viable, it goes, another company comes. You know, it's a constant, I mean, that's what you see in America. Hundreds of thousands of companies close down every year, small ones, but more are reborn. That's how an economy moves. Rejuvenation, not survival of the old.
It's called reincarnation. Right.
Exactly what I said.
That's a good one.
Okay. Now, let's move on. No, we'll move on. You write a lot about women power, and it's a very interesting subject.
He knows it at home.
It's very, very interesting subject because one has assumed that, especially in rural areas, that women vote as they are told by their husbands or fathers or whatever. You know, we are a patriarchal society, we all know that. But you've drawn very different conclusions. So would you like to talk about that?
Well, two things. One is the turnout of women in India in 1962, when the Election Commission started reporting men versus women turnout, the turnout of women was 15 to 20% below men. That means if men were 60%, women were 40%. In the last election, women's turnout had grown so much, it was 1% behind men's, from 20 to 1. And we say in this election, this is the first time women's turnout and participation is going to be higher than men. And it's just a wonderful thing to see. And guess what? In the first 3 phases, women's turnout is higher than men. And just wait and see the next few phases.
Only the women cheered, by the way.
Men look very worried, yeah.
You know, there is another sort of hypothesis to this. If you look at immediately after independence, you know, it was not only a male-dominated society, it was a society dominated by elders in villages. Even today in Haryana, you have Khap Panchayats. So the villagers, the leaders of the villages sat together and decided who the village was going to vote for. Now soon, the men started drifting away and doing their own thing. later the women started drifting away.
Doing
Because
nothing.
I think, you know, the CSDS has done a survey, and I think about 10 odd years ago, when they said that 70 to 80% of the women in a survey claimed that they voted independently. So women are voting independently.
How do they know that?
They asked them the question.
By the way, I've traveled all across India, and there's one question I ask every woman voter. Do you make up your own mind, or do you, and the husband standing next to her, or does he tell you who to vote for? And she says, him? Who the heck is he think he is? And he quietly is. Basically, I think she tells him who to vote for, very frankly. The world, India has changed. Indian women make up their own minds, undoubtedly.
Prannoy,
Undoubtedly.
is this in particular states or all over?
Well, to be honest, it is much more in the south. Indian women in the south are fiercely independent. Northern Hindi belt, still it's about 70% women making up their own mind. In the south, I'd say 95%.
You know, this time in Lucknow, we met a person who's what I would describe as a blue-collar worker. And he said that he was voting for Party A, his wife for Party B, and his mother for Party C. And there were cogent reasons why.
Man is telling you this.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And he actually is giving cogent reasons why the man is taking this decision, his wife is taking another decision, and his mother is taking a third decision. And they're all very sensible reasons. And he's openly telling us this.
There's a very interesting statistic there, which is that in the last election, we know that the NDA won 282 seats, right? We
No,
all
the
know that.
BJP won 282
BJP.
seats.
NDA
NDA won
won
Well, the
336,
sorry,
BJP 232.
The BJP won 282 seats. Now, they had done an analysis and said that if only men had voted, not women, the BJP would have won 376 seats instead of 282, 376. And if only women had voted, then they would have won 265 seats. That's a
I tell you, 336 is what the NDA got. If only women had voted, the NDA would have come down to 265 from 336. And if only men had voted, they've gone from 336.
So what is the kind of percentage difference that would have happened if women didn't vote?
Generally, men tend to support the BJP more than women, much more. The BJP has about a 10% higher support amongst men than amongst women traditionally.
Is this nothing to do with Modi?
No, traditionally.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's how you get the figures that if only women had voted, they wouldn't, the whole NDA wouldn't even got a majority if only women voted.
You know, BJP does have a more masculine, more macho image, starting with the RSS, which doesn't have too many women. Then,
Zero.
you know, look at the number of chief ministers. The BJP hasn't produced women leaders. You know, the Congress has produced. Look at the number of parties today. Mayawati, Mamta, Jayalalitha, who's passed away. I mean, there are so many parties with women leaders. BJP has had a couple of chief ministers, Sushma Swaraj. But, you know, there isn't the kind of, you know, the big ministries are never handled by women. There's no been prime minister.
Now she
Well, now. But, you know, after, yeah.
So,
And the question is whether in Mr. Modi's government anybody heads any ministry, but that's another question we leave for another day.
right. So, is it possible to hypothesize that maybe women form a vote bank? Or you can't say that?
Well, two things are definitely happening, which is it's palpable that politicians are now tuning their policies more to women than to men because of the higher turnout. When they give their speeches, they say, women, please come to the front and talk to the women. The LPG gas cylinder targeted at women. A lot of policies in the manifestos are focused on women, and they never used to bother about women 20 years ago. So women's turnout has made even male politicians wake up and start responding to women voters. But they've not yet had women politicians. The percentage of women politicians in parliament is abysmally low. I can't remember the exact, but about 10%.
Yeah. You mentioned the example of Hegde, I think, in an election.
Yes,
Can you relate that
yes.
to?
Well, we had forecast for the general elections that it was 1980, before many were born, and we had forecast that the Congress was going to win and the opposition was going to do badly, and all the opposition leaders called us into a room. There was George Fernandez, Hegde, all these great leaders actually, and they listened to why, and they were all very reasonable, and they began to understand that you can't have a scientific view of elections, except for one person, the mildest, kindest guy of all of them. Mr. Hegde said, this is bloody rubbish, useless stuff. And then what happened when the results came out, he got 1 out of 28 seats in Karnataka. Soon after that, he called us and said, hello. He was a wonderful person. He resigned from the state government, even though he lost the Lok Sabha. He didn't have to, but he said, obviously, I've lost confidence. So he had resigned, and there was an assembly election. And he called us and said, will you give me some data on how I'm doing in the assembly? Do a poll from a person who's saying polls are all rubbish. He became a total believer, more than us actually. We know polls can go wrong, but he was a total believer, but wonderful man. And we did a poll, and we found he was 20% behind amongst women. We told him this is what's happening. The next day, he announced free saris for women. He announced a whole lot of goodies. And every speech he gave, he said, women up to the farm, I'm only going to talk to women. And by the time the election date came, he'd overtaken the Congress in women, and he won that election. And he became an even greater believer in polls, the silly fellow.
But when you say that, and here I'm going to get a lot of hostile looks from that corner, that does not show women in a very good light, that they were swayed by saris, free saris.
Excuse me, when men are swayed by mafales.
Like what?
I won't even go down that route. This is a family, gathering.
No, but you do mention
Booze.
You do mention alcohol.
Booze.
Alcohol, yes, booze.
Election time, India is smashed at sunset. Everybody is smashed. They've got their booze free. They're just floating around. You go anywhere after 5 o'clock, and they're just like in a wonderful mood, going on their two-wheelers like this, and you think, man, is he ever going to get home? I mean, I gave an example of us walking around a village, I think it was in Madhya Pradesh, and there was a three-wheeler scooter driver. And he was waving at us, I'll tell you who's going to win, I'll tell you who's going to win. So we went, obviously in Hindi, we went up to him, and he wouldn't say anything. So we said, what's wrong? He was swaying around. So everybody said, can't you understand? He's telling you who's going to win. We said, no. He says, the hand. So they can't communicate at a particular, after 5 o'clock, no verbal communication. So do all your surveys before 5. By the way, Punjab is smashed at sunset even when there's no elections.